Welcome back to another episode of Jealousy Junkie. I've been looking forward to this. I have with me today author, coach, podcast host, founder of retroactivejealousy.com. Welcome, Zachary Stockill.
Thanks very much. Thanks for having me.
Well, as I mentioned, I've been looking forward to this. When I was really trying to sort out some of my mess as a child of an alcoholic and growing up in that environment and trying to figure out why am I certain ways, why am I the way that I am? I visited a couple different therapists, and one of the therapists gave me what's called the ACA laundry list. You may have heard of it, but it's the 14 characteristics of a child who grew up in that environment. And when I saw that list, it was like this light bulb changed my life of, oh my gosh, there's actually a list, which means I'm not the only person that struggles with this. And it means that there's probably a solution or a way to not feel these things anymore. And I would imagine that somebody who hears retroactive jealousy and hears what it is for the first time, it's probably a similar experience. Like, oh my gosh, I didn't know that there was a name for it. Can you start by talking about what is retroactive jealousy?
Yeah, so it's a tough issue to define because it's so complicated and so varied among individuals. But in a nutshell, I define kind of standard run-of-the-mill jealousy, or retroactive jealousy rather, as unwanted intrusive thoughts, often obsessive curiosity, and what I call mental movies involving your partner's past relationships and/or dating/sexual history. And if I can break that down a little further, my own kind of working definition for retroactive jealousy, I kind of divided into three distinct categories. So type 1 retroactive jealousy would be, I would imagine most people in relationships can kind of relate. Like, you hear something about your partner's past or you imagine them with their ex, and you feel this kind of pang in your chest. It isn't the most pleasant thing for anyone to think about. That's what I call type 1. Type 2 is what I define as more values-based retroactive jealousy, where you find out some detail about your partner's past, or you learn a little more about something that suggests that maybe it's kind of a red flag, that there could be some moral incompatibility between you and your partner. There could be some lack of sharing of values there. Certainly, it comes up quite often. And type 3 is what I struggled with very intensely in my personal life many years ago, where it's almost more akin to OCD, where not only do you not like the details of your partner's past, but you can't stop thinking about them. I mean, I often say when I was struggling with this at the extreme end of things, my then girlfriend's past was the first thing I thought of when I woke up in the morning and the last thing I thought of when I went to bed at night. And I would be, harassing her with all kinds of endless questions about the details of her past, and I'd have this feeling that if I just get one or two more details, if I can just solve this riddle in my head, and if I can get all the, full disclosure, that's going to solve this problem for me. And of course, it only made it worse. And that is, yeah, I mean, the loose term is retroactive jealousy, OCD.
Yeah. And we definitely know that questions typically breed more questions, especially in this scenario, right? Talk to me a little bit about the first time you heard of retroactive jealousy, kind of how you discovered it. What specifically was going on in your life at that time, and how did you stumble on it?
Yeah, well, I struggled with it. I mean, it's a long, complicated story. The short version is I started struggling with it really intensely in my first serious relationship. So I'd been in high school relationships, but the first time I fell kind of absolutely madly head over heels in love, I was actually in university, or I guess in the States, you guys call it college. I was around
Yeah.
18, 19, and it would come and go. I'd have these intense waves of anxiety, and I didn't know what I was feeling. And I thought that her past meant that there was some kind of moral incompatibility, which in hindsight was totally ridiculous. I mean, my past was more colorful, for example, shall we say. I had more of a past than my partner, but nothing seemed to matter. I couldn't stop thinking about it. I'd have, many sleepless nights, and I'm not proud of some of the things I did. I mean, like I say, I would ask her endless questions and I would guilt her and all these things that are just totally ridiculous in hindsight. But I felt like I couldn't help myself, basically. And in short, I can't actually remember the first time I encountered the term retroactive jealousy, but I can almost guarantee it was on, one of my late night Google binges, just
Yeah.
Googling endlessly, trying to get to the bottom of this. girlfriend's past, can't stop thinking about my girlfriend's past. I can't remember exactly what I was looking for. But at one point, that search led to some kind of open internet forum, I'm sure, because I used to spend a lot of time on these kind of dodgy open internet forums where it's kind of a free for all of people giving advice. Some of the advice was helpful, most of it was not, because most people simply, they just can't understand, they can't even fathom this issue. I mean, 99.9% of the general population has never heard the term retroactive jealousy. And they assume that anyone who struggles with this is, usually misogynist. They assume that it's only straight men that suffer from this, which is absolutely wrong. I mean, I've worked with lesbians, I've worked with trans people, I've worked with gay men. This is not a problem that is simply confined to straight men. And a lot of the backlash that retroactive jealousy sufferers receive is really painful because for many of them, it's like, I don't want to feel this way. I don't hate women. I love women, but I don't know what I'm feeling. And it's really confusing and frustrating and stifling. So yeah, I would imagine I encountered the term in one of those open forums many years ago.
Right. So then how did you know, okay, this is something, I assume it started with you trying to overcome this painful situation, but how did you come then to want to share your findings with other people and help them as well?
Yeah, I think I had the inkling fairly early on in my recovery. Once I started finding techniques that worked, once I started putting my own perspectives together on this problem, I had an inkling early on that if I ever had the chance, I would like to do something to help people because, many retroactive jealousy sufferers just feel totally isolated, totally misunderstood, totally alone. It's a pretty lonely road for most people. And like I say, there's not a lot of public understanding of this issue, certainly. So pretty early on in my recovery, I remember I started working on a blog and I was actually using a fake name at that time because I was in graduate school pursuing another line of research and I was still embarrassed, frankly. I was embarrassed to have acted this way. I was embarrassed to have been a retroactive jealousy sufferer. And yeah, it was really just out of a deep feeling that someone needs to put a face on this issue. Someone needs to start talking about this publicly. Yeah, and it wasn't easy, but eventually I decided that, someone's got to do it, so it may as well be me. And I started counseling people privately, just giving advice and responding to endless emails and stuff on my blog. And I realized that there really is a need for greater public knowledge of this problem, and there's a need for solutions. And so that's what I've tried to offer over the past 10 years. I can't believe it's been that long, but yeah, 10 years.
Yeah, you've been at it for a very long time, kind of the king
Um,
of retroactive jealousy, if you
oh
will.
my, what a
So
weird title. I'm not sure how I
it
feel about
so
that.
is right. Yeah, I don't know if you
Yeah.
want that, Zach, but I think that's
That's all
sort
right.
of
I'll take it.
yeah. But I know that people are really so appreciative of you doing that and really openly talking about it. And I know we both share in that of it's sort of one of those things where I have to be very vulnerable myself and willing to put myself out there and talk about it in order to help other people to understand like we don't need to continue to feel embarrassed by it and that you can talk to people because I know that you have heard, and I certainly have heard from people that they have tried therapy or talking to their friends, and they just don't feel like they're getting any resolution because either that therapist or friend, as you said, most people have not experienced this, certainly in the severe degree that this can get
Yeah.
to. And so it's hard for people to be able to help someone else that's suffering from this.
Certainly. I mean, I want to be absolutely clear. I mean, therapy can be an absolutely incredible tool. If you find a good
Yes.
therapist, hold on to them, keep pursuing that if it's helpful. But one of the most common complaints I hear from people is I tried talking about this with often several different therapists, and I just kept getting these blank stares or this kind of really judgmental, slightly snotty attitude, like, oh, you're just a misogynist or something. Um, so it's a very difficult thing to talk about. I mean, public knowledge, again, as I say, is in its infancy. I've been fortunate enough to start working with some researchers from different universities about this issue and collaborating on some different surveys and some different research projects. So I'm pleased to say that that is changing. But I can, if you don't mind, I'll speak to the whole embarrassment part a little bit because I think that
Yeah.
this is important. I mean, so two stories. I mean, number one, I remember when I came out in air quotes, I put my real name on my book. I started, making YouTube videos with my real name and face and all the rest. And I was actually having lunch with a woman that I used to date, and she'd just become a friend. And we were talking, and I was talking very frankly about, I wonder about the impact this is going to have on my dating life because, I go out on a date with a woman, she Googles me, and it's like, wow. And my friend looked at me with a straight face and she said, Zach, the book is called Overcoming Retroactive Jealousy. And it sounds cheesy, but that moment really meant a lot to me because I realized that, suffering with this problem is not necessarily embarrassing. It's really what you do with it that is, is what really matters. And I'm pleased to say that over the past 10 years, it hasn't been an issue whatsoever for my dating life. And the second thing I would say to anyone out there who's feeling embarrassed or a sense of shame around this issue, obviously I can't and won't disclose names, but I've worked with many clients at the absolute peaks of their professions. People who even some people would know if I said their names. You know, yeah,
Yeah.
celebrities of various stature, people just people at the absolute peaks. And on the outside looking in, it would be insane to think that this person is struggling with retroactive jealousy, but those people can struggle with this as well. This is not an issue that is merely confined to, people with absolutely zero confidence or zero success or whatever. And there's nothing inherently shameful about suffering from this problem. I think that what's important is that you do something about it, basically.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for going back and talking about that because it is important. We never want someone to suffer in silence because they don't want to reach out and talk to someone about it or attempt to get help for it. So, thank you for that. I appreciate it. I did want to talk a little bit about you mentioned some of the things that you did in the past and like not necessarily being proud of them. I'm right there with you. Some of the things that I have done in my relationship, even with my husband, kind of make me cringe a little bit looking back. And I think that sometimes people also see someone who is suffering from jealousy or retroactive jealousy as someone who is very controlling, maybe narcissistic. I mean, we get a lot of those things. Can you talk a little bit about that and just the things that people may do when they're suffering from this?
Yeah, one thing I'll note to start off is one of the really interesting things about this particular form of jealousy, if you can call it that, retroactive jealousy, is I guess I would probably say a majority of sufferers actually don't exhibit the more normal jealous behaviors in their relationship. They're not super controlling. They don't have those constant mate guarding instincts in the present as it relates to the present. But they have them in extreme with regards to their partner's past. Kind of interesting there. And I think that it's fair to say I fit into that category as well. I'd had some vaguely jealous pangs with regards to my partner's present, like, I don't know, I'm at a bar and some sexy guy walks by and he comes to chat up my girl, something like that, but never in extreme at all, actually. Retroactive jealousy for most people involves symptoms like, well, just the intrusive thoughts I have to mention once again, often constant, really graphic sexual imagery in the head, and constant curiosity. There's this feeling that if I just get the answer to one or two, and then it turns into 10, and then it turns into 50 more questions, and on, if I just get the answer to these questions, often about very granular details about their partner's past. I mean, what were you wearing? What was he wearing? Where did you do it? Where did this happen? What did you say to her? All of these things, very granular details. And so that can involve things like these interrogation sessions, essentially, with one's partner, where you're just constantly grilling them, but all the details of their past. There's often a lot of shaming involved, even if the person's past is 100% normal, because I think the retroactive jealousy sufferer, they're trying to rationalize their feelings. So they tell themselves, I only feel this way because there's actually some problem, there's actually some moral incompatibility. And like I say, that can be involved in certain cases of retroactive jealousy, 100%. Sometimes walking away is absolutely the right decision for everyone involved. But in my experience, in the majority of cases, that's actually not accurate. And once the person starts getting a handle on their problem, they realize at a fundamental level, there's no incompatibility between me and my wife or me and my husband or me and my boyfriend or girlfriend. This is simply about my own fears, my own insecurities. So the endless questioning sessions is a big one, or at least the impulse to ask a million questions is a big one among retroactive jealousy sufferers. There's often a lot of social media stalking too. I mean, Facebook and Instagram are a great tool for anyone who wants to kind of sift through the details of their partner's past, as we all know. So often retroactive jealousy sufferers will go on these, mad Facebook binges, and they'll go to the, all through the person's timeline, and who's this person tagged in that photo, and what does this comment mean? And as you know, it's very easy to misread and misinterpret that stuff on social media. But obviously that adds a lot of fuel to the speculative fire that is retroactive jealousy. I think there's often people, spend a lot of time again Googling and just, spending hours and hours and hours in internet forums looking for relief. So those are some of kind of the ways that retroactive jealousy plays out in terms of actions.
Hmm. Yeah, and you mentioned compare or being upset about the partner's past, which is the fundamental piece of this. But it can even be that the person who is suffering from retroactive jealousy has, as you said, a more colorful past than than their partner who they are
Very, very common.
questioning, right?
Extremely common. I mean, a lot of the time, I think people write to me and they assume that, well, my partner's past is slightly more colorful than mine. So if our pasts were somehow equal, in air quotes, if I'd had the same number of sexual partners, if I'd had the same number of relationships, then I wouldn't be struggling with retroactive jealousy. And I can only point to myself as an example that that's not true, not necessarily true, and a small army of other people who I've heard from where they have the exact same story. Sometimes their past is, 2, 3, 4, 10 times more colorful, shall we say, than their partners. And they're still struggling at the extreme end of things. Another myth that I really want to start to take apart, in terms of the public discourse around this issue is somehow the idea that just because you're having a certain reaction to your partner's past, that automatically means there's some moral incompatibility in the relationship. I'm sure you're familiar with the so-called manosphere and red pill communities. And a lot of these guys find these online communities, and a lot of the advice they get basically tells them to, anytime you have any kind of a reaction to any woman's past, that's, on to the next one kind of thing.
Ugh.
Which I think is totally senseless. I mean, again, sometimes there are glaring red flags, sometimes there are incompatibilities, and walking away is the right choice. But the point is, you should spend the time to get a handle on your brain, to get a handle on the intrusive thoughts before you can see clearly enough to make such a momentous life decision, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. Yeah, that's horrible advice actually of stepping out and ending a relationship without, first really determining what's going on. So what
Well,
steps could someone take?
if I could just very briefly, like I want to say to these guys giving that advice, like many of my clients, they're married to absolutely, just to use the male example, they're married to absolutely incredible women. They've got children. She's been an absolutely fantastic wife. Her past is by no means out of the ordinary whatsoever. And I want to say to these guys, so what are you suggesting? Are you suggesting that guy blow up his entire life, put his children's futures in jeopardy? Like what is that your solution? Really? Like, doesn't make sense to me. And by the way, the men in those scenarios almost always to a man realize that their feelings are completely irrational, right? There's no actual there with regard to their partner's past. So, sometimes walking away is the right choice, but it certainly isn't always.
Yeah. And I'm glad that you brought that up because I think even in the jealousy that I speak on a lot, which is what you were talking about earlier, someone attractive in a bar, my my boyfriend or my husband or my wife is looking at that person and I get upset and jealous or they're talking to them. But I think in both scenarios, most of the time we do have an idea that we are being potentially irrational, right? Like we're kind of
Hmm.
maybe already aware that, yes, as strong as these feel and as strong as my conviction is that maybe this is wrong, we also have that tinge of, "Ugh, but I may be being irrational." So we can already kind of feel that.
Certainly, yeah. I mean, I kind of like to think of it as the way I frame it as listening to your higher self, despite the protestations of your ego. So I see, jealousy as being largely about insecurity and fear. And that's the ego. That's the part of us that wants to keep us small. That's the part of us that yearns for external validation. That's kind of our smaller self, or the way I frame it. And you're right. When we're in these situations, there's often kind of a battle between the two opposing sides of our psyche, where there's what I call our higher self, the version of ourself that knows what we should do, that knows this isn't a big deal, that knows that another fight with our partner won't do us any good, kind of our highest wisdom. And then our insecure ego that's kind of poking and prodding and also wants that attention, wants us to listen to him. So you're right. There's often these kind of two sides of our psyche battling. But the good news is the more you listen to what I call your higher self, the more you give that voice its due, the more you trust the wisdom, the deep wisdom of your highest, your highest self, the easier it becomes. And the more you build up that muscle, shall we say, of even though it's difficult in the moment, the more I listen to my highest self, the better things get, over the long run.
You were talking earlier about mental movies, and that is what some retroactive jealousy sufferers do is they play this movie. They've asked several questions that they want to ask their partner, and they're trying to get all the details, and then they create this movie that they play in their head. I reached out to a group of retroactive jealousy sufferers and to let them know that I would be speaking with you and having the opportunity to ask you some questions. And one of the questions came up several times about these mental movies. And in a twist to that, of being upset about these mental movies that they're playing in their head, they are also, some mentioned they were sexually aroused by the mental movies. Do you see that with retroactive jealousy sufferers often?
Yeah, it certainly happens. I wouldn't necessarily say it's the majority of cases, but I have seen that frequently. Yeah, where someone's, eroticizing or sexualizing their partners past to such an extent, it almost becomes a turn on. A couple things I would say to that. Number one, I think it's pretty likely that person is probably a consumer of pornography, of video pornography. I've noticed a correlation there, not necessarily causation, but definitely correlation. Obviously, if you're struggling with mental movies, adding more violent, graphic sexual imagery to the cocktail in your head is probably not going to help matters. I often encourage retroactive jealousy sufferers to go 100% cold turkey on pornography as quickly as possible. And by the way, this is not a moralistic argument. I'm not suggesting that pornography is evil. I'm saying if you want to solve this problem, porn isn't helping. It's probably making the situation worse. But sometimes when something in life is so painful and so disorienting, on some level, we feel like maybe even subconsciously, the only way through it is to somehow make it like we like it or something. You know what I mean? To try to solve it through sexualizing it or through eroticizing it. That's kind of my working theory on why people do that.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. I mean, kind of taking it to that next degree and having more images to then take whatever situation whatever answer they've gotten from their partner almost to a further degree.
And I would also say one more thing. I mean, have you ever heard of the Madonna whore complex in Freudian
No.
psychology? So it's a very old idea, but in essence, some men, mostly men, unwittingly go around on some level dividing women into two categories. So on the one hand, there's the virginal, pure, maternal, matriarchal, angelic figure that's pure as Snow White, and sex is
Right.
it's not even totally desexualized. And on the other hand, there's the quote unquote the whore, the woman who is just ravenous sexual appetite, porn star, whatever. And many men, when they fall in love and when they create a relationship, and often when they get married and start having children with a woman, they desexualize her to such an extent because on some level they're playing that out in their head. But their pent up sexual feelings still need some kind of an outlet. So maybe some of these people on some level, they've desexualized their wife to such an extent, but they've sexualized her past before she was a mother, before she had kids, before she was nagging, that kind of thing. I also think that can
Right.
happen sometimes too, where men are kind of slotting their women into these two categories or completely desexualizing their partner in the present, so they have to sexualize their past.
Oh, very interesting. Yes, thank you for
Just a
sharing
theory.
that.
Just a theory.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I know that you have a program that you offer people to go through. One of them, Get Over Your Partner's Past Fast. Can you talk a little bit about what that is, what someone would expect from that program?
Yeah, it's at the risk of sounding immodest, I'm really proud of it because it's helped thousands of people at this point. It's basically a very structured program people can follow at their own pace to start getting a handle on the intrusive thoughts, to start getting a handle on the mental movies, to start getting a handle on the question of values. There's a series of lengthy guided meditations throughout the course designed specifically for this issue of retroactive jealousy. I do some Q&As in there as well. But in essence, it's the most comprehensive program that I know of designed specifically for people struggling with the intrusive thoughts, the mental movies, the obsessive curiosity around their partner's past. And again, I like it because it's completely go at your own pace. Many people have found it very helpful. And yeah, it's been going. There's some version of it's been updated quite a bit, but some version of the course has been going since around 2014, and we've had thousands of graduates. So I'm very proud of
That's
it.
amazing. Yeah, that's amazing. So I know your recommendation would be for people to go through that program, but I wondered if you could give just a few tips for someone if they're suffering from retroactive jealousy, some real actionable things that they could start to do until either they go through your course or as they're, looking at different options. What are some things that they can start with?
Well, the first thing I would say is obviously I'm very proud of the course. And if someone wants to join us, we'd love to have them. But if you don't want to join the course, that's fine. I have literally hundreds of videos on my YouTube channel, completely free. If you go to retroactivejealousy.com, same thing, hundreds and hundreds of blog articles. I mean, just when I thought I didn't have anything more to say about retroactive jealousy, I think of more things to say. It's endless. So if you join
Yeah.
my course, we'd love to have you. But if you don't want to, that's okay too. The second thing I would say is in terms of just basic ground level advice for retroactive jealousy sufferers. Number one, stop talking to your partner about their past. Sounds simple. Obviously, this alone is not going to solve your problem. But, if you're in a sinking ship, you should start plugging the biggest hole first. And to my mind, that's kind of one of the biggest causes of retroactive jealousy is just excess information about your partner's past. That isn't actually important. That isn't related to a serious conflict in values. That isn't related to a deal breaker. And by the way, if you're asking your partner endless questions about their past, that's putting tremendous strain on the relationship. That's probably dampening their attraction to you. It's bad for all kinds of reasons. Stop asking your partner questions about their past. And related to that, I would say, don't put this problem on your partner or anyone else to solve. Your partner, no matter how incredible they are, no matter how much they love you, no matter how much perhaps they want to solve this problem for you, retroactive jealousy doesn't work that way. Otherwise, I would have a program, for the partners of retroactive jealousy sufferers,
Right.
but it doesn't work. It's not effective. So own this problem 100%, start taking steps to solve it. I mean, I can give a million more pieces of advice, but one thing I would suggest is try to take up some kind of basic mindfulness practice. Nowadays, everyone and their dog is preaching the benefits of meditation. It's a very unoriginal thing to say, but there's a reason why meditation has survived for thousands of years. There's a reason why it's having such a moment in our culture right now. It's because it's an incredibly valuable tool. I'm not suggesting you should be like the Dalai Lama and, striving towards enlightenment, but some kind of a basic breathing routine, some kind of basic mindfulness practice will go a long way towards orienting yourself in the present more often, because that's what we're interested in here. We're not interested in fretting about the future, which that's what is involved in a lot of more normal relationship jealousy, right? What if my partner leaves? And we're also not interested in fretting about the past, which is retroactive jealousy. Let's stay grounded in the present moment. And mindfulness practice can go a long way towards that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I want you to take it a little bit further because one of the questions that we had, and I tried to take, they're just, of course, and I'm sure that you've seen this, is a theme. There are several, probably it's the same question, maybe asked a little bit of a different way. And one of them was they're not necessarily so focused on their partner's past in terms of what they did, but the type of people that
Mm.
they did things with. So, and I think in a lot of cases it was the exes were wealthier than them or took them on exotic trips that they're not taking them on. Could the same techniques work in that situation when it's kind of about the who it was versus the activities? Because it still seems to be
Yeah,
focused on the past part.
sure, sure. The answer is the same. However, I would also say if you're genuinely feeling a lack of investment or commitment or desire from your partner, that isn't necessarily irrational. Now, obviously, everyone's going to be a little different there, but there could be a case where perhaps, your partner isn't as committed to you as you are to them, or you're feeling some lack of love or desire or investment. And in those cases, then I think getting an outside opinion can be very valuable. Confiding in friends and family members, therapist or a coach, something like that. But I don't mean to suggest again that this is always irrational, because it isn't always irrational. However, I would also say, don't sell yourself short. Because I think a lot of jealousy sufferers in general, we tend to sell ourselves short. We don't trust our partner's words of affirmation. We don't trust their demonstrated desire for us. We don't trust, the way they make us a priority in their lives. So we think that other people are sexier or wealthier, or we think people from their past are better for them, or whatever. So I would say trust your partner's desire for you, realizing that I really think for the most part, human beings don't settle. I think that that certainly can happen in certain situations, but there's a lot of narratives out there that, women just want to settle down with the boring nice guy, and or men perform a similar kind of settling. Sometimes that happens, but frankly, I think it's pretty rare because human beings are selfish. Human beings respond to incentives, and figure out basically what are you bringing to your partner's table, so to speak. Get very, very clear on why your partner is with you. And by the way, you can do this as a thought experiment without involving your partner, but really try to look at the two of you as objective outside observers as much as you possibly can. And just kind of let your ego run wild. Like, why is your partner with you? What are all the qualities you bring to their life? What are all the things you do for them? What have they told you? Like, you can quote them directly. Try to get a very, very clear picture on exactly why your partner is with you. And I think that will go some way, hopefully, towards easing some of that kind of insecurity.
I love that because, okay, yes, they could have had somebody who had more money than you or had a better house than you, but you can have so many other qualities that are absolutely
Yes.
amazing that overshadow that. I also love that you said people don't typically settle because we get in our heads a lot about that. I hear from a lot of people in the insecurity of maybe I'm not good enough or I feel like I'm not good enough for him or her. That's just such a powerful thing to consider is, that person picked you for a reason and we are selfish beings for the most part. And so we're not going to put ourselves through that in settling for someone.
Exactly, exactly. Yeah, it's a pernicious myth that seems to be having a moment in our society of the idea of settling. And again, I'm thinking in my head of a lot of the red pill manosphere online communities that have a lot of what I believe to be a lot of misleading narratives about women in general. Yes, it does happen, but it certainly doesn't happen nearly as much as what a lot of people seem to suggest.
Yeah, yeah. Another kind of question that kept popping up was, and I think I know your answer to this, but I want to hear your response. People were asking and saying, okay, I know that Zachary says we shouldn't keep questioning our partner. So we shouldn't, run through question after question after question about their past. But then they wanted to know, well, if I don't ask the questions about their past, how will I know if me and my partner are experiencing something for the first time, or we could in the future have a sexual experience that's just for us?
Well, one thing I would say, just to broaden the question a little bit, is sometimes people say, well, Zach, if you say that I shouldn't ask my partner about their past, how am I going to learn about them? How am I going to know about their past? And the answer to that is simply everyone's favorite topic of conversation is themselves. And if you simply sit quiet and pay attention over long periods of time, eventually that person will tell you about their past and who they are without much interrogation or deliberate questioning on your part whatsoever. The key word there is time. The more we feel comfortable with someone, the more time we spend with them, eventually we're going to start sharing our stories and opening up and all this stuff. And I think also, if you want to learn about your partner's past, asking them very pointed, heated, directed questions is not going to get you the truth, because as soon as someone feels like they're in an interrogation room or they're being judged or whatever, they clam up. If you really want to know who someone is, make them feel as comfortable as possible and as not judged as possible. And eventually they will open up about the most intimate details of their life. It's just a question of when, if you're a decent listener. So that's what I'd say to that. In terms of I get this question a lot, like the novelty of sexual experiences. It's like, well, I want to do this for the first time and I want to do that for the next time. I mean, I guess I understand. I would say if you're from an extreme religious community and, for example, virginity is an absolute ironclad value for you, well, then, yeah, you should figure that out. And if your partner doesn't share that, then you should move on. No, no harm, no foul. Not judging that. But in terms of the overall, I want my partner to experience this for the first time and I want them to experience that for the first time. I mean, the way I see that is every human being is a universe unto themselves. I mean, you can have related sexual experiences with multiple partners, but each of those experiences could be extremely, extremely different. So, if you're worried about the novelty of a sexual experience with your partner, if they're having that experience and they love you for the first time with you, that is going to be a new sexual experience for them. Maybe they've done certain acts in the past or whatever, and that troubles you or what have you. But I don't know. I mean, the way I see sex and sexuality, and it's just every woman is a universe unto herself. There's no there's limitations in comparison there, and I think the same is true for men as well. It's like every sexual experience with a new partner is new in a very real sense.
Can we talk a little bit about where you think retroactive jealousy stems from? Because one of the questions that came in as well was they know that they've had past trauma. So they had trauma in their childhood and really questioning when something happens in the relationship or they hear something about their partner's past, they start questioning, is this something that I should just like it's a moral difference between the two of us, or is this just fear-based because of the trauma that's happened in my past? You started to touch on that a little bit. So could you answer that and then talk about where you think retroactive jealousy stems from?
Yeah. Well, the first thing I would say is that whole question of determining whether or not your partner's, or sorry, whether or not your retroactive jealousy is more or less rational or irrational. That's a really, really complicated question. And I mean, it's tough to give blanket advice there because it
Yeah.
depends so heavily on the individual, their goals, their vision for the future, their partner, et cetera, et cetera. Just to be a shameless salesman, I created a program called The Path to Peace that's several hours long just about that question because I think it's really complicated. But in terms of where retroactive jealousy comes from, I think that it can involve many factors. I think there is, and I have no evidence for this, but I think there is a biological component to this. Some kind of obsessive thinking. I mean, they've done studies, for example, on people with just plain OCD, and there are
Mhm.
parts of their brain that are functioning a little differently. So I do think there is some kind of biological component to this. You'll find often that many retroactive jealousy sufferers are overthinkers in general. And while that certainly doesn't indicate a mental disorder, I think it does indicate that, our brains might function a little differently from a lot of people's. And I also think for many people, social, cultural, religious factors can be involved. I mean, I don't think it's an accident that I get a lot of emails and a lot of questions from people in more religious slash socially conservative countries, Saudi Arabia, India, Pakistan, places like that. That certainly doesn't represent all of us, but that is a sizable chunk. I think those social and cultural religious factors can definitely play a role. And I also think if for anyone struggling with this, it's a good idea to go back to your childhood or your adolescence and start thinking about some of your earliest ideas about men, women, dating, sex, and sexuality. Because as we all know, those early ideas about the world, they can form some of our background programming for decades later, even though we might not be entirely conscious of it. So it's good to think about that as well. What are some of the earliest ideas that I was presented with about good girls and bad girls or good men or sex is bad or sex is, whatever. It's like really spend some time thinking about that stuff because I think that can often play a role as well. And certainly past trauma can play a role for certain people. Maybe someone was betrayed terribly in a past relationship. Or
Mhm.
maybe one parent betrayed another, in a relationship or something like that. I've definitely heard that story more than once as well. Some kind of past trauma that could be spurring on retroactive jealousy.
Because I know that you've done so much work and this really started with work on yourself, where do you think yours came from?
Ooh, that's a good question. Well, now I'm getting really personal. To be honest, I think once I came out with this issue, I started hearing from certain family members, I won't say who struggled with very similar issues. And that's what another reason that leads me to think that there's probably at least some biological component to this. Because again, people only felt comfortable telling me about this after I became the retroactive jealousy guy. So I think that's
Yeah.
rather interesting. I don't think it's related to past trauma for me. I mean, I grew up in an extremely loving, supportive household. My parents were married for, 30 years until my mother's death. Extremely good marriage. I had no problems with women from an early age, even, high school and stuff, no issues there. So I think for me, it was largely about, I think there probably is some biological component if one were to study my brain, my strange brain. But I also think, for me, it was unrealistic ideas about life and love. And I think I was an extreme romantic in my early years. I mean, I write poetry and I'm a songwriter and, I'd go to Shakespeare plays and I had this kind of really romantic idea about the way the world works. And that led me to say and do some really ridiculous things. I mean, the thing that I think about all the time that makes me cringe to this day is I remember in my first serious relationship when I was a young man, I said to my then girlfriend with a straight face, I said, if you even are attracted to anyone else at any time that we're together, I don't think we should be together. Which, like, that's insane because there's sexy people everywhere. I mean, even if it's just a fleeting noticing of another good-looking person, for me, that was too much. That's how extreme I was in some of these really conservative views about life and love. And it's weird because I didn't grow up in a house like that. But I think maybe, I don't know if it was what I was reading or whatever.
Right.
But at the end of the day, a lot of it was just plain about fear. I was desperately in love with an incredible woman, and I was scared to death of losing that, and it brought up all kinds of emotions in me. And yeah, it was a really it was confusing, just the e- how extreme my emotions were around that relationship.
Well, thanks for sharing that because I know that what I hear often and what I experienced was, I felt bad for some of the stuff that I said and I did to my partners at the time. But I will say, like, no one wanted to be different or to change more than me. And I was
Sure.
the one, you know, who had control over that, but it felt very out of control. Like there was no control. There was no way to change the way that I was and sort of just felt
Yeah.
doomed that this is the way I'm made and there's no answer for this.
One thing I feel strongly though about mentioning is I think sometimes some people, when they find the term obsessive jealousy or they find the term retroactive jealousy, they kind of use it as an excuse to engage in a lot of counterproductive and some borderline abusive behavior in their relationship because they use this diagnosis as like, I can't help myself. I have this thing. It's like, what can I do? I'm a victim, right? And I want to be clear that that is not what I'm about at all. I mean, we may not have control over our thoughts all the time. We may not have control over the fact that we're struggling with this issue, but we always have control over our actions, over the choices we make in the present. So I just always want to emphasize that point. Don't use a diagnosis of obsessive jealousy or retroactive jealousy as an excuse to treat your partner poorly. It's just a lousy situation for everyone involved. And believe me, if you have any conscience at all, eventually you will feel real profound regret at some of the decisions you're making right now.
Absolutely. Thank you for coming back and saying that because I do think that is important to not fall on that for people to not think, "Oh, well, that's just how I am. Oh, okay, they're great. There's a name for it. That's just how I
Yeah,
am, and like it or don't, that's how I'm gonna be." Great, we've now identified it, but that's just even more of, a reason to go, "Okay, I do know that this now has a name and that there are things that I can do to overcome this and to be better in my relationships and to be better in myself."
absolutely. Well said.
All right. Any last final advice for retroactive jealousy sufferers before we let you go?
Yeah, I would say, God, I won't go on for an hour, but I easily could. Own this problem, take the steps, do whatever, research you need to do to find something that works to start making progress. If that involves therapy, great. If that involves my work, great. If that involves someone else's work, great. The point is you have to start taking steps to find the resources you need to start healing. Unfortunately, this problem does not go away on its own. Many people try that. They just think if I just ignore it, it'll go away. It doesn't. You have to start taking proactive steps to start healing. And by all means, do not lose hope. Because even if I always say, even if you don't believe me in my story, that's fine. You can go on my website and find dozens and dozens. I think we're over 100 now of real testimonials from real people who've, taken the steps and they've worked through this problem. You are not destined to live with this for the rest of your life. You're not destined to a life of singlehood because you can't handle an intimate relationship. There are things you can do, there are steps you can take that can truly, put this problem behind you for good. Peace of mind is absolutely possible. It's simply about taking the steps.
Yeah, love it. If one thing doesn't work, we, try a different method and try a different technique, I think is very important. Yeah.
Don't lose hope. That's my message.
Well, thank you, Zachary Stockill. I appreciate you joining Jealousy Junkie.
Thanks very much for having me. I enjoyed it.